If you want to understand the moon in the 10th house, I suggest brushing up on what the 10th house symbolizes and what the moon symbolizes, because then you'll be able to interpret their combination with much greater ease. Starting with the 10th house, here it is. 10th house is anchored to the part of the sky which is up over your head. And that is the root of everything that it symbolizes. It's the open sky. Therefore, it symbolizes things which are very, very visible. This is why it's the house of the extraverse. Not the internal aspects of reality, the external aspects of reality. So it's all about society, the visible world, public. And that, in turn, is why it is the house of fame. So it has to do with what we do in the world, aka our career, how much we achieve here in the world, aka our status or success, aka fame. And this is why it's the house of influence, power, authority. How much can you control that world out there? The open sky is also a very windy place, and it's not very solid. So the 10th house signifies movement, travel, change. It's not rooted and it's not stable. So it's a house of instability, where things get dispersed, spread out, or where they evaporate. Well, that's the 10th house. Now, how about the moon? The most obvious thing about the moon is that it's the brightest thing in the sky at night. So it's bright at night, which means that it has this dichotomy between being both bright and dark. And so the moon represents bipolarity or dichotomy, cyclicity, rhythmicness, change, fluidity. Since it's bright, it represents beautiful things, things that catch our eye. Since it's night, it represents the unseen things. So it's all about privacy, private things, shyness, keeping things unseen, things that are inside the home, unseen by the public, domestic things, and also mysterious things, esoteric things, occult things. Now, since it's about the occult or the internal world, it's therefore about the internal part of ourself, which is the mind. Mind is a word we use for the part of the self that experiences emotions. Emotions are based on desires. Whether or not you get what you want makes you either happy or sad. Desires are based on opinion, what you want and what you don't want. So the moon, by symbolizing the mind, symbolizes all of these things. Opinion, subjectivity, bias, which leads to desire, which leads to emotion. Also, since the moon represents internal things, it represents the internal gender, which is the feminine gender. And now, taking that back to the moon being bright, it's very dominant in the sky at night. It represents authority, but it's also internal and feminine. So it represents feminine authority, the archetype of which is the mother. Now I believe we're ready to talk about the moon in the 10th house without getting too confused. What may have caught your mind and jumped out to you already, because it's pretty obvious, is the dichotomy between the moon being internal, the 10th house being external. So there's a clash between the planet of privacy versus the house of publicity. So generally speaking, we should expect negative results from clashes in symbolism. But I want to show you an interesting principle, an important principle. This is the principle of the importance of accumulation of synergy. If all of the synergy between the planet and the house is positive except for one, then that one which is negative or clashing tends to get away from being negative. So let's hold off on interpreting this one. And let's see what else there is about the moon and the 10th house. Let's see if it's all clashes or if there may be some positivity to it. And also, let's think about this internal versus external. Another way of saying this is it's female versus male. But remember, the archetype male for the 10th house is father. The archetype female for the moon is mother. So it also is translating to a clash of the symbolism of mother versus father, but that's not much of a clash, is it? Because they're both parents. So the moon represents authority, and the 10th house represents authority. Another thing is that the moon represents beauty, and the 10th house represents fame. Remember, why is it that the moon represents beauty? It's because it's very bright, and the bright things catch your eye. So it's the same thing as fame, being noticeable, being looked at, being seen. And finally, another thing to take into account is that the moon is a change or a fluxy planet. And that goes very well with the 10th house, which is a movement house. It's a windy house. So now let's go back and give some interpretations for these basic signatures that we found, these fingerprints that we found of the symbolism. Let's think now about this difficult one of the privacy of the moon clashing with the publicity of the 10th house. The expected result from this is called Sat Priya Kara. Very, very interesting. It means that they do good. It's the symbolism of the mother acting in the father's role. The symbolism of the internally sensitive person acting as an externally active person. So what kind of deeds will they do? They'll do motherish deeds. They'll do kind deeds. So when people have the moon in the 10th house, one of their expected characteristics is Sat Priya Kara. They do things which a saint would approve of. Literally what the phrase means. They do things that are kind and generous and loving. Do they have a problem with expressing themselves and being authoritative? Not really. But why not? We have a clash between internalism and externalism. It's because we don't have a clash on authority, which is the next principle. The moon represents authority and the 10th house represents authority. So we aren't going to interpret the previous thing to mean that they're weak. Instead, we're going to say that they're Jai. They tend to win. They tend to succeed. They tend to be better than others. Now, how about this third principle of the moon being the planet of beauty and the 10th house being the house of fame? So both of them are attractive and beautiful. The effect of this is Shubhakrit. They do things well. They do things beautifully. And people look at their deeds. People look at what they do. They're known. Moon in the 10th house symbolizes somebody who appears nicely. They look well. They express well. They do things well. Beautifully. They're expert in how they do things. They do things with refinement. The final principle is the planet of change in the house of movement. Siddharamba. It means that they make changes. Able to be different. They're able to set trends. They set new things in motion. Invent new things. They come up with new ideas. Let's look at some well-known people with confirmed birth times who have the moon in the 10th house using tropical signs and the whole sign house system. Bill Gates, Salvador Dali, Frida Kahlo, Angelina Jolie, Edgar Cayce, Ramana Maharshi, Swami Vivekananda, L. Ron Hubbard, Charles Manson, and Bernard Madoff. Bill Gates really shows the inventiveness, Siddharamba. Also, he's known controversially, perhaps, but he's known as a very charitable person, gives a lot of money away. So that exemplifies the first principle that we looked at very strongly. Then you have Dali, Kahlo, great painters. So here's how you have doing things well. Very expert or refined in how they do things. They bring beauty into the 10th house. Bring beauty out to the world. Angelina Jolie could be considered in the same group because she's physically beautiful and also she's an artist, actress. She's bringing emotions, etc. out. And then we have a group of 4 kind of occultists. Edgar Cayce, Ramana Maharshi, Swami Vivekananda, L. Ron Hubbard. So here you also can see the effect of taking the internal planet and putting in the external house, putting the occult planet in the house of exposure. Exposed things are revealed. Their secrets, the esoteric, is revealed through these people. Also, this shows a very literal aspect of the first principle, Sat Priya Kara, which literally meant they do things that sadhus do. They do things that saints do. But then you have two people who are like the opposite, Charles Manson and Bernie Madoff, two criminals. That makes you wonder. They did things that are approved by sadhus. They did kind deeds. So let's take a look at one chart of each type of these persons. Let's look at Frida Kahlo for an artist, Ramana Maharshi for the occultist, spiritualist, and Charles Manson for the criminal. Let's start with Frida Kahlo. She really exemplified the ability to bring beauty and fame out from the moon. Why is it? How come Ramana Maharshi wasn't an artist? Well, Frida Kahlo has the moon in Taurus in the 10th house. So it's bringing out the artistic creativity. Furthermore, she has Venus in the 11th house. The 11th house is for the expression of beauty, the showing of art. And Venus is the planet of beauty and art. Not only that, but Venus is the third lord in the 11th house, which means the ability to create art using the hands. And not only that, but it's in the third sign. So again, the ability to create art using hands. On top of that, even still, 11th lord is dominant because it's in the first house. 11th house is a huge focal point in this chart. So we have a lot of what we need in terms of the astrological DNA code to get a great artist. The third lord in the 11th house, in the third sign as Venus. But we're missing the fifth lord. So what's going on with the fifth lord? Well, the fifth lord is exalted in Raja Yoga. So that does explain why Frida Kahlo is a person whose moon in the 10th house is in the context of somebody who becomes an artist. Let's look at Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi is more exemplifying potential of the moon in the 10th house to make you behave like a saint. So his moon in the 10th house is in Cancer. Look at what it's with. It's with Ketu. Ketu is the single most spiritualizing factor in astrology. So basically speaking, Frida Kahlo's chart is contextually very artistic as the moon in the 10th house. Ramana Maharshi's chart is contextually very spiritual and has the moon in the 10th house. That's why the moon in the 10th house supports being an artist for Frida Kahlo and supports being spiritualist or an occultist for Ramana Maharshi. Now, how about Charles Manson? How does it support being a criminal and a murderer? Well, his moon is exactly Rahu. That is a signature that we very often find in criminals. Also, it is conjoined Saturn in Saturn's sign with Rahu. So that means that it's an inimical dignity. It's a negative dignity. Here, Charles Manson's moon in the 10th house with Ramana Maharshi and with Frida Kahlo using just the most simplest basic principles of astrology like dignity. Frida Kahlo's is exalted. And Maharshi's is domicile. Charles Manson's is inimical. It's in an enemy's sign. A very strong enemy. Just using that basic principle, you wouldn't expect the same kind of results in these three charts, would you? Then getting a little more sophisticated, you can see that it's with Saturn and exactly with Rahu. So it's going to be destabilized. Yes, he tried to be an artist. Yes, he made big changes in the world. Yes, he was a trendsetter, but mostly he's a very unstable person. If you want to actually have my interpretations for all of your placements in your chart, you can go to my website and order that from the charts page. It's victorcara.com/R2. Thank you so much.